Thanks for joining us here on Service to School Stories. Your hosts for this season are Alec Emmert, Service to School CEO and Navy veteran.
And Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer and former college admissions officer. This season will cover topics as it relates to higher education, military service transition, and career opportunities and outcomes for veterans. Join us as we share student stories, inside tips from the admissions office, and conversations with employers actively hiring student veterans. Here we go. Welcome back to the Service to School Stories podcast. Today we are chatting with Subin Kim. Subin served in the U.S. Army and is a current student at MIT. Subin, thanks for joining us today and sharing your journey with our listeners. How about we get started? Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks, Sydney, for having me on this podcast. I'm excited to share a little bit of my story, and hopefully this will be interesting for you guys. I'm originally from Orange County, California. That's where I grew up. And I am currently attending MIT with the AI and decision making as the declared major. I can tell you a little bit about the background history of how I ended up at MIT, starting from my high school story in Orange County, California.
Yeah, I would love it.
So upon graduating high school, I was actually decided on going into a college. Was Cal State Pomona in California. And I was about a month away from actually going into the dorm. So I had signed everything. I was about to start packing when I received a phone call from a recruiter from the Army recruiting station. That was just like 15-20 minutes away from my house. And somehow they got my number. I got the phone call through my cell phone. So that's when I had the first talk with the recruiter, when she was talking about the benefits and what I would be able to achieve within the military and after, which hooked me on. So that's where it all started. I enlisted into the military. I was in Korea, South Korea, for a year, up in Area 1 and then for the rest of the time for active duty military, I was stationed at Fort Drum, New York.
Cold up there at Drum.
Yeah, very cold.
So what was your job in the Army?
So I was a 92 Yankee, a logistics supply management specialist.
Okay. So for listeners, some of them might not be in the Army. Some of them might not necessarily have any idea. What was your kind of like day to day like?
As the main job and the responsibility of 92 Yankee consists of taking care of military equipment for the commander that was in charge for the company. So it's keeping track of handling equipment as well as the personnel, even down to their clothing data. It's just managing the assets that commander is signed with a liability to helping him ensure that everything flows smoothly and keeping track of all the supply data and equipment.
Sure. Okay. So after doing that, at what point did you decide you were going to get out, and what was kind of the thought process around what was going to be your next step after you get out?
I guess even before I enlisted, that talk with the recruiter, the main point that she was pointing out was the education benefit. So going into the military, that educational consideration was actually the biggest part in joining the military. So I knew what I wanted to do after military.
Sure.
I served the initial contract with a little bit of an extension for the deployment. So I had finished out the deployment. I had about a little over 5 years in active duty time. That's when I ETS'd out of active military and moved to Virginia. So that's when COVID hit.
Yep.
I took a year off from everything. And then I enrolled at Northern Virginia Community College. Mainly because of the location for the initial start of my higher education didn't have to be a specific location. Since I could be anywhere attending a local community college, and that's where I want to start off. I attended Northern Virginia Community College for 2 years while doing a reserve duty for 2 additional years at Fort Belvoir.
Okay.
And I kept the same MOS,
Okay.
job description.
I want to talk about that a little bit, right? So, a lot of applicants that sign up for service to school, they have college credits or they're considering going back to college for the first time to kind of get that recent academic experience under their belt, right? So, you spent 2 years at Nova, Northern Virginia Community College.
Mhm.
Did you complete how many credits there?
I completed 60 credits.
Okay.
That's equivalent to the associate's degree in computer science.
Got it. So you were studying, still kind of focused on computer science at Nova there.
Correct.
Talk to our listeners about the types of classes that you were able to take at Nova.
Um, for the most part, I followed the curriculum, and I'm just being honest here because the curriculum itself, I think, is designed so that it kind of lays out the foundational academic information that requires you to pursue higher education following your associates, right? So for the most part, I think it would look similar, if not almost identical, to most other colleges that offer computer science, which consists of, apart from the electives, I think it would be just some coding classes as well as some mathematics and some other
Yeah.
sciences.
What were the math classes that you took?
It was calculus. They're both calculus 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. And prior to that, did you have to take a placement exam or were you able to start taking calc classes once you got there?
I don't think I had to take or a placement test for math. I started out with pre-calc again when I first went to Nova. And the time before that was when I was in high school. That was, yeah, I'm not sure when that was.
Not recent is
Not recent
right.
for sure.
Because I think, we have applicants that come to us, they want to study CS and like
Mhm.
they haven't taken a math class since high school. And we're like, well, if you want to apply to incredible, academic institutions, those of the likes of MIT, you're going to need that strong math foundation because yeah, can you hop into a Calc 1, Calc 2 class without any, kind of refresher, if you will. So that's kind of why I was trying to figure out, what was that academic experience like for you, reestablishing those, math skills. So completed your associates at Nova. And at what point did you decide the schools that you were looking to transfer to and kind of how did you do that research piece?
I would say I didn't think I would end up at MIT, right? And I think that's a fair assumption. And I thought, the thought process was that, why not just try, shoot for it?
Sure.
And because it was, so I established a list of schools that I wanted to attend, and they consisted of a couple schools that I thought were, overreaching, that I thought were pretty comfortable getting into, especially with a lot of colleges having guaranteed admissions. So I think I ended up applying to about 6, 7 different schools, and I think thanks to you, Sydney, and as well as my ambassador Eric and my peers and some other help, my friends, I think I got enough courage to apply to those schools that I got into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of backtrack a bit. So you talked about those guaranteed admissions programs, and there are opportunities, especially within Northern Virginia, right? You get this
Mhm.
guarantee if you get a certain GPA of admission to other state institutions. And that GPA will vary based on the institution within the state. We've seen similar programs within California. So, if California community colleges have admissions guarantees at some of the UC campuses. So would absolutely encourage listeners, as you're thinking about transferring from some of these community colleges, looking into those articulation agreements or those transfer pathways that some community colleges have set up. So smart of you to kind of use that as your kind of like plan B, right? Because then you at least knew, well, I have guaranteed admission at some of these other options if my top choice schools don't work out. So at what point in your transfer process did you get connected with Service to School?
I think that was the second year. Going into the second year at Nova, I learned of this program through one of my friends from the military. So that's when I found out initially. And then I think throughout the fall semester the fall semester, so that's a year before transferring, I think that's when I really started to reach out to the school, services school.
Yep. I remember you coming to one of our first virtual college fairs. That's when I met you in one of our Service to School booths. So looking back on that admissions process, what would you say was the hardest part?
The hardest part is, I think, which a lot of people would agree on, is the essay portion, because of all the, it's just the application process itself is very tedious and nerve wracking. And I think I was complaining to Sydney a couple times about how the prompts are, so you have to be engaging with the prompt in order to say your piece, and essentially it kind of acts like a elevator pitch,
Yeah.
but it's just a lot more, you have to be a lot more elaborated on expressing in words how awesome you are, right? And I think the hardest part on that was just seeing myself, how amazed I was at how much little I had to write about myself. And it's just like pondering, brainstorming on what I would write for the this prompt or that prompt for different schools. I think that was the hardest part.
Yeah. Um, and kind of what advice would you have for someone who is currently in the weeds of writing those essays?
I I think the best advice is to start early, because in my experience, I reached almost like a hard stop at couple prompts that I wrote for some of the schools, and having that extra time to look over and rethink and reevaluate what you actually want to say through those essays is really beneficial, especially when you have a couple different schools that have a similar prompt, but it's also very completely different.
Yep.
So having that extra time to your advantage would be the most helpful.
Yeah. I remind students all the time, it's never too early to start thinking about the college admissions process and what that timeline looks like, but it can absolutely be too late at some points. So as you're what, in your second year at MIT?
Yes, I finished out my associates, but when I transferred to MIT, the and I think this is for every transfer students at MIT, we transferred as sophomores. So I just completed my sophomore year.
Okay. And when you were applying to schools, did you take any of that into consideration in terms of like academic transfer, or if they weren't going to take all of your credits? I think a concern that we hear a lot is people are like, I just want to transfer in as many credits as I can, graduate as soon as I can. And if they're not going to take, all 60 of my credits, then I don't want to go there. So did that thought ever cross your mind?
So on that note, I think I found out a little too late, partly because I haven't really dug into the MIT website looking to see if they were able to transfer all of my credits. And I think it's more or less same situation for every other transfer students, because we didn't really know how the actual situation was here at MIT. And I think that would be helpful, if that would have been helpful if I had all the information that I would have needed to consider. in deciding as a deciding factor.
Yeah. And that's one thing we try and advocate for is encouraging admissions offices to give as much of that information up front, right? So then okay, that school's going to take X number of credits, that school's going to take that number of credits. I know where I'm standing at when you're kind of comparing those offers of admission, right? You had mentioned joining the military for education benefits. You only get a certain amount of time for those, right?
Right.
So are there schools that you're either going to run out of time or that are going to give you some time left over if you're considering graduate school? And I think that makes the planning part even more important, right? Because did you use any of your GI Bill at Nova?
I did not use any of my GI Bill. The first time I used it, was here at MIT. That was part of the transfer process. A little more ambiguous in my experience because I never had to um, apply for what's it called? Just using the GI Bill
Mhm.
through my school. So just not knowing how the process works, on top of figuring out the classes, uh, housing, financial situations. It's just
A lot to navigate when it's new, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so in completing your second year, what was the difference like from the classes at Nova and the rigor of the classes at MIT?
I think the surprisingly unsurprising part. It's surprisingly obvious to say that MIT is one of the rigorous academic institutions, and it was no joke. The first semester, I think I was pretty overwhelmed because of the difference in the pace, as well as the amount of workload
Mhm.
that was, in my experience, different from what I experienced at Nova. Think throughout last year, I spent 60 plus hours every week because we would have to go to lectures, recitations, doing P sets, and those problem sets. They're at incredible pace. They cover a lot of new materials every
Mhm.
week, so it's just academically it was just a challenging environment. So that having that those two to compare, I think it's just a lot more.
A lot more. Do
Yeah.
you feel like there would have been anything you would have done to prepare for that transition, or is it kind of like you just don't know until you're in it?
I can actually say this from experience. So going into the first semester here, I had to take calculus 3 because the second calculus class that I took at Nova didn't cover all of the materials that were covered here at MIT. So I tried to prepare for a little bit, just a couple weeks, or I think it was like a month before starting school. And I thought I pretty much covered a lot of materials. So I felt pretty confident going into that class again. But I think we covered the material in like a week at
Flew through
most.
it.
So I mean, it definitely helped,
Right.
but there were a lot more information.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, let's talk about the community there at MIT. Because again, I think we have a lot of applicants interested in studying there,
Mhm.
and we, I think, have 4 or 5 veterans on the campus there at MIT.
Yes.
So talk to us about the campus experience. Where have you found community, and what has that transition been like for you?
Out of 1,100 new students every year, there are about 20 or so transfer students, which I think every year work together to form a group, with transfer students. So you get to know each other before you meet any other classmates, whatever classes that you're going to take. So the orientation week, you have a general orientation for all of the students for all of the first years. In addition, you have a separate transfer students orientation that includes all the information that just the transfer students need to know. So through those information sessions and gatherings, you meet with other transfer students, So that is your initial connection that you can build, which is what I have done here. And taking classes throughout the semesters, we make friends doing problem sets. We have to meet up for group activities anyways. Um, so I think it's very natural for us to, once you transfer into MIT, you're MIT students, just
Sure.
like the other 1100 of them, right?
Yep.
So that just the initial integration, that's a little different, but it's the same
Yep.
throughout.
Sure. And then can you talk a little bit about being an older student than majority of the student population? What's that been like?
Um, at first, it was a little off because for me, I just have about 10 years difference between myself and majority of other students. There are other transfers who are a little older. So most of them have gone to either a different college or a community college. But even then, they're 20s,
Mhm.
22,
Sure.
right? But I don't really feel the difference or the the gap in age, especially because we're for the most part we're doing schoolwork. We're helping each other learn, keep each other accountable, teach each other. I think that is the one of the best ways to learn.
Mhm.
So apart from that, we help all the students. We help each other out. So there is not really a barrier
Sure.
just because of that age. I think the younger students rely on the older students in terms of life advices or relationship advices. But apart from that, schoolwork is the main portion
Mhm.
of the social gatherings,
Sure. Sure.
so they say. So
What are some experiences you've had either outside of the classroom, either with like student organizations or career services? What has that experience been like?
as a veteran, we're not a typical traditional students, right?
Mhm.
So we're at the crossroad where we have professional experience, where we're depending on which area of interest that you're trying to pursue with your degree, you can be kind of seen as any other students, right? So you're at the crossroad where you have some experience, but you're also still a student.
Mhm.
So for a lot of the job fairs and stuff, they specifically target different kind of audience.
Mhm.
So I think career fairs and stuff, when you go and speak with the representatives from different companies, you're found with them being in awe,
Mhm.
having that experience and having the courage to come back to school.
Yeah, for sure. And then let's talk a little bit about looking forward. So, any idea in terms of once you graduate, what you're kind of hoping to do or where you're hoping to land after you graduate from MIT?
Before transferring, I was pretty set on just finding a job once I graduated undergrad. But now I'm a little hesitant because I feel like there are other options available for me following my undergrad degrees in pursuing masters or going into just higher education.
Hmm.
um, so I'm still currently debating on whether I want to continue higher education or get some experience under my belt. Everything's still up in the air, um, but I think I'm just leaning towards just running with whatever I have,
Hmm.
hoping for the best outcome.
Sure. And kind of want to bring it full circle. So as you're, thinking about what's next after you finish up at MIT, do you look back on your military experience and see how any of that has kind of either like supported you where you're at today or kind of driven where you're at today?
In terms of academic pursuits, for me, because one of the main goals for me after the military was to go back to school,
Mhm.
I think learning about myself as a person was the best part in the military. I learned about like work ethics, having the grit, having the determination. They all played a big factor into going into study sessions, keeping up with the study materials,
Mhm.
being patient, So it definitely helped in some ways having that experience, or knowing about myself.
Mhm.
That has helped. But I can also say that the stress and the workload while I experienced in the military is completely different from the stress and the workload that I experience at MIT currently.
Mhm.
Um, I think for the main part, what I experienced through the military was mainly physical. Well, whereas here, I'm always worrying about the new materials, the study sessions. Would I be able to do well on the next test?
Mhm.
And I don't think, looking back, I don't think I had that much of a stress problem at my community college. But here at MIT, I can definitely feel the difference, where I don't even have time to think other stuff than about the study material that I'm going through. So at waking hours, I'm constantly thinking about how to solve this problem. Not because, well, not because, partly because I want to, but mainly because we have to finish and meet those deadlines, right?
Yep.
So it that having that experience definitely helps, but it's not 100% transferable.
Sure. Sure. What advice would you have for an applicant? And I know I've sent you a couple of applicants
Mhm.
that are interested in even just chatting about your experience at MIT. So what advice do you have for applicants that are considering either CS at MIT or pursuing, admissions at a very academically rigorous institution for that field?
Uh, before going there, I want to bring it back a little bit to
Mhm.
what you mentioned about the career fair.
Yeah.
I've been to the service school career fairs, and I found them very informative in preparing for the applications process and the admissions process, because I was able to get hand to hand, or face to face experience with the school advisors and ask specific questions,
Mhm.
which is where I failed to ask questions about transfer credits. But I think I covered most of the general questions that I wanted to ask.
Mhm.
So in case you want more answers, I think that would be the first step in reaching out, asking for feedbacks, asking for help, asking for information. I think that is what I found really helpful with
Yeah.
the application process.
For sure. Especially when you're kind of trying to figure it out as you
Right.
go, right?
Right.
As many people as you can ask questions to. No question is a silly question because, too, that answer for a lot of schools, it's going to be it depends, or the answer could be
Right.
different for one school versus another one, right? So, the more questions that you're asking, the more people that you're asking those questions to, it's just going to give you more tools in your toolbox to make the best decisions for you, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of times students forget that in the student position, you have the most control over this admissions process, right? Like you have control over where you apply. You have control over the essays that you write. You have control at the end of the day in choosing the school that you decide to enroll at. And the schools are there, to kind of guide you in that decision making process. So to your point, ask all the questions to everyone. I love when I'm able to put prospective students or students that are even just interested in MIT in touch with you, or any of our other ambassadors that can kind of speak to their experience and what their journey was looked like and what their experience is like at their current institution. Because when you can ask people that have kind of walked that walk or have the information to be able to give you the best guidance, it just allows you to have the best outcome for yourself. So solid advice there, Subin. Great. Well, this has been so fun, as all of our conversations about your college admissions journey. And thank you for sharing your time with us and our listeners. I know we will continue to have applicants that are interested in chatting with you and supporting you in your work as an ambassador. So, Subin, truly thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you. That was an awesome time.
Absolutely. And we'll chat with you later.
Yeah.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.